Hi there, welcome to a Mark Leverage at Home on the Court Coach Development Resource. Today's topic is opponent scouting and match plan preparation. And we are going to go through today some of the principles of scouting, some of the things that we should be looking for, some of the common traits that we will expect to see, at least at the one particular level, and then how to prepare and present the match plan for your team. So let's get going right away. And the first thing is, before we even start to think about our scouting, our match plan preparation for an individual or for a particular opponent, we need to have some basics. We need to have, for our team, a basic block and defense tactic. Also, of course, a basic offensive tactic. But today, our focus is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. So we need to have a starting point for our block and defense. And that is really simply the basic system, which will be our starting point for normal games or games in which we have no information. And that will include things like what we want our middles to do, what we want our outside blockers to do, and what we want our basic or our base defensive positions to be from rally to rally. And that's the starting point for everything we do. There will be obviously situations where we don't have a lot of information about our opponent, and that's quite possibly the situation that you'll find yourselves in, or the team might play a different lineup that we don't know about, or we discover that there's nothing particular about an opponent that we need to change our system for. But for everything we do, we need to have that basic starting point from which to develop our game-to-game variations and game-to-game tactics. The next thing that we undertake is a study of the individual opponents in order to develop our match plan for block and defense. And this is perhaps the most important slide in the whole session. So after this, you can maybe don't need to know anymore, but this is really important. And we are looking for areas that are not covered by our basic tactics, firstly. So if our basic tactics are perfect, we don't need to do any scouting. And the areas that we need to pay attention, or what we need to pay attention to, are areas that are, or things that are recognizable, things that are predictable, and things that are actionable. And that is really the key to any form of scouting, and what you need to pay attention to, whatever the team is, and it will vary from team to team, of course. So these are things that the players, not the coach, the players can see easily from their positions on the court. They're things that they need, that have a predictable outcome. If player X does such and such, then the outcome will be an attack in position 4, for example. And they need to be something that we can do something about with our team. So one of the mistakes that coaches can make is that they will be able to, with the video and fast forward and freeze frame, see a lot of things. They'll be able to find some little thing when the left finger is pointed in that direction. He 100% of the time, spike X hits cross court, and that is predictable. Actionable, we can block cross court, for example, but it's not something that blockers can see, or indeed should be looking for, in the course of a match. So our basic principles for starting our preparation, for starting our scouting, are looking for things that are recognizable, predictable, and actionable. And we need to know the most important information for the team that we have right now. And this is addressing another common error that coaches make, especially young coaches, is you don't have to tell your team all of the information that you don't have to tell your team all of the information that you find out. Even if you can find a long list of things that are recognizable, predictable, and actionable, players won't remember all of them anyway. So you need to pick out the top, whatever the number is, perhaps smaller the better, that the team will be able to use from a point-to-point basis during the match. So choose the things that the players are going to be able to use, and you only need to tell them those things. You don't need to prove that you watched 25 hours of videotape. What you need to prove to the players is that what you say actually happens in the game. And if it's only one thing that you see that you can predict, that's the one thing that you say. And that is the thing that players will remember and give respect for. What do we need to study? Statistics, of course, as many matches as possible. Now, for many people, that number of matches is 0 or 1 or 2. That's perfectly fine. But if we have the access to more statistics, we can certainly look at those things. But very importantly, we need to verify the statistics with the video. So we can't be working only with statistics, and we can't also be working only with video. Video can lie just as much as statistics. Then we're talking about things like confirmation bias, where we see one thing, the setter setting a ball to the spiker who just made a mistake. We see it happen one more time, and that's our confirmation of our observation. And unless you have the statistics to back it up, that is not a useful piece of information. So statistics can lie just as well as video, or vice versa. So we need to have both. What are our opponent's tendencies? And mostly in the following areas: in attack, in setting, or of a particular setter. Normally we would pay most attention to one setter, and the serving tendencies. And this is a very important and often underlooked part of our match preparation. Technically not block and defense, but also important, and something where we can find identifiable, recognizable, predictable, and actionable tendencies. Spiking tendencies. A few examples here. So we start with the outside spikers, for example, looking at how they react to fast balls to the outside. So the standard in-system ball, the standard ball after reception. And we know before we even start some of the tendencies that are general for all spikers. So we know we can predict at men's professional level, and you should be paying some attention to your own level, and you hopefully will have built up a database of information, at least in your own mind, preferably with some evidence to back it up. But you should have some form of informal or formal database for your own level. And we know that men's professional level, most fast balls or faster balls to the outside position 4 and position 2, position 1 are attacked. Let's say position 4, position 2 are attacked cross court. So that's a good starting position. And for our basic tactics, that's an important thing to know. After fast balls, after in-system balls, we need to look at the high balls, so balls that are out of system, balls that come from difficult situations, non-setter situations. And one of the tendencies in that case, really common tendency, is to not be aggressive in attack and to use tips and off-speed shots, perhaps to take the setter out of the play. Different spikers will tip balls in different places on the court, and those are some of the things that we can look at straight away. We can also break down some different situations, for example, attack after reception, or attack after transition, or after defense, or after the receiver's own reception, for example. They can all make a difference. It's pretty common to see that a spiker will spike more cross-court after reception, but more line on their own reception. And it's also a little bit more common to spike line after defense, for example, from a ball that's off the net, but nothing is 100%, and that's why we're not using these basic tendencies for our match plan, but rather using the statistics and video observations that we're talking about here. Spikers who tip, they can have different kinds of tips. So tip directly over the block, a tip past the block to position 2 or 4. These days we can also include different kinds of power tips, and those should be scouted separately and paid attention to separately, and every player has slightly different tendencies. What you'll see very often is that teams have dedicated tip defender, even though the opponent does not tip very often, and I would consider that to be poor tactical preparation and a bad use of resources, but that is just me. We should also be scouting the opponent first tempo attack and the different kinds of attack that they use in different rotations, perhaps, if they spike differently, different direction. For example, if they're coming from behind the setter or in front of the setter, that can make a difference to the type of attack. If they're spiking with nowadays we're talking about a lot of kind of floating attacks. So we need to try to find some tendencies in the first tempo by rotation, also by which receiver is front row together, and so on and so forth. So they're our basic spiking tendencies, or at least the things that we should be looking for when we're paying attention to spikers. The next thing that we need to do is really search for the setter's tendencies. And there's a lot of different things that we can look at here. And this is the one that can really take the most time. The most common one, the traditional one, if you want to call it that, is to look at the rotational distribution. So when the setter's in position 1, in 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, we can look at that, and we can already say in every level there are some predictable situations, and we have some examples of the predictable situations in men's professional volleyball. At different levels there will be most definitely some different or perhaps some of the same ones, but some different ones also, and we can go through the rotations one by one. So for example, here we have the setter in position 1, and the key information here is that the opposite is in position 4 instead of 2 or 1. The receiver is in position 2 instead of 4, and it's for that reason it's one of the most difficult rotations to consistently get out of for a receiving team, and it is, from a serving and blocking team, the rotation normally with the most obvious tendencies. And the most obvious of those is that if you don't watch any video of a team, you can with almost 100% certainty say that the setter in position 1 is the rotation with the most pipes. And that, of course, is because the opposite and receiver are in their unusual situations, and it is the toughest rotation for that reason. And the number of pipes played in this rotation begs the question why more rotations don't have more pipes, but that's a question for another topic, perhaps another webinar. In position 6, when the setter is in position 6, means the middle blocker is coming from behind the setter, and what we can with some confidence, not 100% confidence, say is that the first tempo will spike more towards position 1 in this rotation, and for the reasons of the receiver being in position 1, there is the least amount of pipe in this rotation. So there's a couple of things that we can already know before we sit down and look at 1 minute of video of our opponent. With the setter in position 5, we know a couple of things, and one of those is that the libero is in position 1. So our serving target should be between position 4 and position 5. But this is commonly a straightforward rotation. There will be some pipe because the back row receiver is in position 6, and it's very easy for them. Setter comes now to the front row. Actually, I forgot one here. This is difficult also because the setter actually has to turn around, and that can cause problems for some setters. And indeed, you might see here that position 2 doesn't get as many balls as you might expect because of the difficulty the setter has to turn around, and sometimes perhaps serving to position 1 would be a better idea than it would seem to be by having the libero there. The setter in position 4, now we have that bigger effect. This is the most difficult rotation for the setter. Often they won't be able to get all the way to the setting position. And for this reason, it is typically the rotation with the least amount of balls set to the opposite. Position 3 and position 2 are similar in that there is sometimes, and this would depend on the level, and the lower the level, the more stark this tendency is, but these will be the rotations with the least amount of balls set to the right side of the court, in this case position 1, and there's really big opportunities there to organize our block to take advantage of some of those situations, even at this level. The lower the level you get, then the more opportunities there are to take advantage of the 3 blocker versus 2 attacker situations. So that's the rotational analysis. We can look at quite a few other things. One is what we sometimes call the setter call, which is what the setter calls to the middle blocker to run, what kind of first tempo. And this is a really good one to look at because it's the setter's first decision. And the setter can give you a lot of information about what they are thinking by what they call from the middle blocker, what they expect that the middle blocker will run. And there are some examples of this. So if the setter is playing a quick close to the net, or sorry, close to the middle of the court, then we can maybe think that they want to play anywhere. We see more pipes in this situation. We see more balls to position 4. We don't see this too often, but the quick behind the setter, we can sometimes see this might be that we see more balls to position 4. And with the long quick, at every level, we can see one of the, well, there are 2 possible situations here. One is to play back, where there's a big chance of a 1-against-1 block. And the other one that we saw a lot at the Olympics with the teams playing in the final, particularly France, that they played with the long quick and over the top to try to, over the top to position 4, to try to make the blockers jump with bad time. So those are the different setter calls. So we have the first tempo close to the net, and this can be basically anywhere, perhaps a little bit more pipe and position 4. When the first tempo is running away from the setter, we can see that already in this picture, the opponent middle blocker is a little bit past the center of the court, which means that the space, there's almost certainly going to be a hole in the block for the opposite. And that is one of the goals of the setter. We can make, if we know that in advance, we can make some different blocking decisions. And when the first tempo is behind the setter, perhaps we're expecting to see the ball to position 4, or in this case, a tip. If you have eagle eyes, right there. Other setter tendencies, differences after reception and defense. One thing that we can see, for example, is transition balls only high or only fast. Sometimes teams will play only to position 4 on a high ball. If they have an option, they will only set to position 1 as a last resort. Different setters can have favorite players in different game situations, particularly in transition. This one is something that I pay a lot of attention to, and this is the court position for the setter. And one thing that we have to remember, and we sometimes forget this, I think that there's a big tendency to imagine setters as being geniuses and conductors and perfect. They are in fact not technically perfect, and there is, I'm going to say no setter who can really play every ball from every position on the court. There are some who are better than others, of course, but every setter will have some weak spot somewhere, and we should identify what the tendencies are in that situation. One of the most obvious ones that we'll see a lot is that when the reception is in position 4, there can be very strong tendencies, and particularly in the case of not wanting to play or keeping the ball short, first tempo and position 4. We don't often see the long ball to position 2, or especially to position 1. When the setter's moving back, they can have some different tendencies. The movement back is often a technically difficult move, so the balance is less good. We can see some things there. And once the ball comes out to the 3 meter line, and we can start to see some real preferences. Perhaps in that situation, it's more an individual preference of which spiker they want to use, rather than a better front or back situation. Here are some of the visuals. So the setter is towards position 4. Does he want to play short? Kurz is the German for short. Lang is long. And we can see the middle blocker for Germany here is expecting that the Arash Dosanjh will play more short balls than long balls. In the converse situation, they have a little bit more respect that he can play everything, both short and long, although we can see that he is in position 1 here, so perhaps they're actually waiting for the pipe we've already talked about. And when they get to the 3 meter line, does the setter want to play more balls front, more balls back, or perhaps play more with the opposite? Those are other possibilities that we can see. More setter tendencies. The reception, where is the origin of the reception? Remember, setters are not technically perfect. They can especially have problems when the reception is coming from position 1, even the top level setters, but serving tactics generally don't take that into account, and especially because the libero is often in position 1, and I suspect that the serve to position 1 is underutilized for that reason. Coaches would prefer that the libero didn't receive, or would prefer a worse reception from a better position than a good reception from a bad position. And I'm not sure that that's the case. And you should probably check what it is in your level. When the reception comes from position 6, we can often see that the more first tempo. When the ball comes from position 5, we can often see more front row, but those ones are a little bit less predictable than some other situations. And of course, the combinations of things, so they're also something that we can take into account. This is another one of my favorites. So where does a setter set compared with the opponent's rotation? And this is especially the case if you're a team with a small setter. Not all opponents take advantage of a small setter. They will use their normal tactics always, their normal offensive principles, but some teams, of course, will really target a small setter, and that's something that we should know in advance if we can. And thinking about this particular topic, when we started with our point A, which was the rotational tendencies, we only think about them from our side. And of course, the setter's decision making is much more complex and includes what's on the other side of the net. So if we have the ability to look at the opponent or a particular setter's distribution compared with the opponent's rotation, then that can often give us some different insight than if we're only thinking about what they do with their side of the court. Crunch time, which players get the balls at the end of the set, the most important times. Turns out that this is really difficult to predict because, or at least to study, because there tends to be a very small amount of crunch time over the course of a given season. So you have to make a little bit of guesswork. Sometimes you can use some information that you get from other studies to find that information, but basically over the course of a season, in a whole season of 25 or 30 matches, it's easily possible to have less than 20 crunch time situations per rotation for a team. So when you have 20 actions over the course of 6 months, it's not a very predictable situation because so much changes over that time. In the crunch time, there can be a favorite spiker or a favorite position. So we can look at both of those things, given the restrictions or given the negative that we just talked about. Another one is how setters react in a service series. What happens if they don't side out, or if it's the first serve in a series, if they don't side out once, if they don't side out twice. We can see some predictable tendencies in those situations. And that's the end of our, abruptly, of our setters' tendencies. You might be able to think about more. One thing that I do a lot, and especially because I have access to the Science Untangled setting app, is combinations of different things. So particularly setter position by rotation, setter position by opponent setter, different things like that. They can, studying those combinations can actually give you a few more predictable situations that might not otherwise be obvious. Serving tendencies. The first one for us to look at is directions, and to try to discern in some way whether the direction that we see from a server is an individual preference or it's team tactics. Sometimes it's not clear whether which is which, but if we can, that is valuable information. And sequences, what we see more and more is servers that change during a series, so either by changing their starting position, changing their target, changing the type of serve that they use. Sometimes they do this in series. And one thing that I study a lot is actually the opponent setter position, and particularly where is the libero. So what can really often happen is that the three rotations where the receivers are together in 5 and 6, the teams or players will strong serve in that direction in those rotations, but when the receiver is in the middle of the court, they'll have different serving tactics. And that's what we talked about here in point A, about the difference between individual preference and tactics. And one of the confusing parts, or one of the complicating factors there, is that what you can often see a server who will nearly always serve in a particular rotation. Teams don't change that much what their starting rotations are. But then if you find yourself in a different rotation for whatever reason, they can serve in places that you wouldn't expect. So that's why we try to work out what the tactics are of the, or whether the directions are a result of personal preference or tactics. How do we study our opponents? This is the question. And I'm sure that you're thinking, well, it's okay for someone to do that with all of the resources that I have. And it's certainly true that I have many resources. There are scouting programs. Data Volley is the most common one, the one that I use. Volley Station is a new one. There are other also simpler versions, but we should never forget that we used to do things in a certain way when we didn't have resources, and we were still able to study opponents, and the old school way can still work. This is an example of a printout from the Science Untangled apps that I just talked about earlier. You can see here on the screen the URL if you want to have a look at it. But these are heat maps of spikers' directions from different balls. This kind of thing obviously works the best if you have a relatively large set of data. And as you can see from the ends here, actually do have 50, 150, 180 attacks from each attacker. And of course, we can get from that, we can get a really good, clear understanding of what it is that they prefer to do. In reality, it turns out that if you're really watching, you can figure things out within, let's say, 10 or 15 balls. And the extra ones are just to be sure, or just to be make sure that you complete the process and don't necessarily give a lot of extra information. So don't be stressed out if you don't have a heat map with 100 and, for example, here 188 spikes. That David Konarski spikes mostly in that direction is pretty clear after 15 balls, and the 170 extra ones are just for fun. The secret weapon for the old school is the 4-colored pen. Every coach should have at least one of those 4-colored pens in their bag at all times. And I would add, I don't have a slide for it, but I would add a liquid paper pen, or a correcting ink pen is the companion to the 4-colored pen, and those two things go together. And if you have 4 colors, then really you can, with just a few lines and a few numbers, you can come up with some pretty amazing things that I'm about to go through now. It's an example of an offensive scouting sheet, a pretty simple one by rotation. This is the sort of thing that we would use to watch an opponent if we were in the gym with them. So here is a slightly more complicated one where we're paying attention to the different first tempo that the that the setter is calling, and it's a lot of stuff in here that I won't bother explaining, but we will go through quite a bit of it. So this is the P6 from a match that actually watched during the match. So this is a live scout. We'll go through bit by bit. So we have our 3 courts, and the 3 courts denote the first tempo situations, the 3 basic first tempo situations, the A quick, the 1, the B quick or 7, and the C quick or 2, depending on where you're watching this from, or 61, 51, and 31 if you're North American. Here in this live scout, we were also watching who the opponent serving in each rotation was, because that could give us a little bit of extra information, who the server was. Here is it's a running sheet, so the numbers are as the match goes on. So this team obviously started in P6 and had their first attack of the match was a back set to the opposite. And then we can see, by following the numbers, we can see if the setter uses some kind of runs or setting a hot guy. We can follow that. You can see the colors that show each of the different sets. This is a shorthand notation to follow the setter's tendencies depending on how he moved along the net. So this particular setter, and I honestly have no idea who it was, otherwise I would tell you, but this setter, when he was moving back, so the circle being, or the dot being his position and the line being the direction. So when he moved back, he wanted to set the short ball. So that's information that we can even follow and follow during the match if we have a little bit of practice. Here we have, for the attack directions, we have some different notations. This being a point, a circle being a ball that stayed in play, for example, that line there meaning that it was blocked out. The short lines tend to mean that the ball hit the block but was spiked in that direction. So there's our circle, meaning the ball stayed in play. The curved lines mean a tip, and this one was a tip that stayed in play. And a few from position 4 also. From a different match, so this squiggly line in my notation anyway, you can of course use any notation that you want, was a ball that was behind the block. So the block was cross court and the spiker didn't spike exactly on the line, but spiked sort of almost in zone 6, and more or less so on and so forth, depending on your imagination, how many colors you have, and how many different notations you can think of. You can get a lot of information in a short period of time, and the color coding helps with the visualization process. So one of the big advantages here, for example, is that I don't need to have any calculations or spreadsheets or anything. I can just see straight away visually that this is a rotation that they played not very many balls in the middle of the court, little preference towards position 2 than position 4, and we can see the directions. Position 4 spike mostly cross court, which we could have predicted from our sort of basic information, and so on and so forth. So the colors and the notation gives a visual component to the information that you can see just by looking at the paper without necessarily reading or calculating in your head what any of the particular numbers are. So once we have done all of our study and we've collected all of our information, we've decided on our game plan, how are we going to present that information to our team? Our match plan. So the match plan is what is outside our basic tactics. That's what we discovered right at the beginning of this presentation. And remembering our 3 key points: recognizable, predictable, and actionable. And everything we do in this process has to be remembering these 3 points. Everything that falls outside there is fun stuff to know. Maybe it's something that you can use during a game, but it's not something that should be in the match plan. What do we show the players? We show the players the set of tendencies that we have chosen. We show the players the individual spikers' tendencies. We can show the rotations. It's not something that I do a lot of, but we can show the rotations. We should definitely show the service of the opponent. And this is another key point, is that the information, the match plan that you present to a team doesn't always have to be exactly the same, because we are looking for recognizable, predictable, and actionable activities. They are going to be different from game to game. So in some match, the setter will follow the rotations really closely. Some matches, some setters will be really strong with what they do with the setter call. Some spikers will do only one direction or have three directions, and whatever it is, it can change from match to match. So we can have a basic template, but we don't have to fill in all parts of the template before we give it to the players. Here are some examples of game match plans that I have actually used. So this was one particular season, and this is basically all of the information that we need to have in the game. I like to put the opponent's team list on there so we know who we're talking about, and I always use names and not numbers. I think that's important for showing respect for the other team and for showing your team that you respect your opponent. Just by giving numbers, I find that tends to reduce the amount of respect that players have for an opponent, which is, in my mind at least, not desirable. Money time. So this particular match was the first match of the playoffs, and we had some information about the offense, which with the setter in particular, what the setter wanted to do, some information about what our serving should be, which we haven't really talked about here, but we can accept under the setter conversation, and then some things about our what our blocking should be against individual spikers, and then some information about the opponent's servers. That's one example, one piece of paper. And in this case, I actually didn't even give, in this season, I didn't even give the players this every time. We actually hung it up in the change room for the players to read, and then tested them on it on game day. So that's one way of doing it. This is another real life match plan, a little bit more complicated. Doesn't actually have that much more information, but the visual part of it spreads it out over the course of 3 pages. And we have here some information about the setter, and this is actually 2 different setters. It was a VNL match, and in Volleyball Nations League, you never know from game to game who's going to be playing, and so for this reason, we have all of the spikers. If we could predict the lineup, we would be using more. Obviously, we would have less things on here, but we had to be not showing everything, but a little bit on every player. Information about the server, and this is really at the highest amount of information to give players. How we present the match plan to the team. Obviously, we have the printed version that the players receive in some form. Can be electronic. A lot of teams now will use a PDF sent to the WhatsApp group or the Messenger group, however they do it. At the moment, I still mostly print it out beforehand, but that can change at any time. Times they are changing, and players process information in different ways as well. We will have, of course, a video meeting. That's the one thing that won't likely change. And in the video meeting, we choose a video, and even if we have a lot of statistics and a lot of information, the video should focus on the last few matches. They're the most recent ones and the ones that are most likely to engage the attention of the players. And then we get into some really important parts about the whole process, or really crucial actually from my point of view. And that the first one is that the video should really clearly represent whatever is in the match plan. So for that reason, you really need to be careful and precise about the actions you show in the video. So I would never, for example, even with a small amount of time, I would never just show one set and talk over the set, because there's so much other stuff happening. I want the information to be clear and concise and precise, that everybody really understands it unequivocally. And so the players hear from the printed match plan and from the speech of the coach what is in the video and what is in the match plan. Those things have to be consistent. And in terms of speaking to the team in the video meeting, in the match plan presentation meeting, if you have to make sure that all of that information is complementary and consistent, then practice your speech. And I can tell you from my experience that when I was preparing the clips, I used to spend a lot of time choosing exactly the right actions, and I would rehearse exactly what to say at exactly what moment of the video. And if you do it really well, then you can say exactly the words on the paper at exactly the moment in the video. And that makes sure, firstly, it's consistent information, unequivocal, but also it reinforces all of the information that you want the players to take away. With the video, so this is what I do and recommend, is a video of individual spikers with their different options, the high balls and fast balls after reception, after their own reception, not always exactly the same, but if there is some particular tendencies, but this doesn't have to be many actions. So it can be 4 or 5 from each type of attack, as long as you're getting through all of the information in a consistent, concise manner, stuff that we've harped on a fair bit in the last 5 minutes. I like to show a video of the rotations as much as anything, to give the players practice at looking at where the opponent is going to be standing at in each rotation, and then to reinforce what the individual spikers do in the different moments. And the third video presentation is of the servers with any or whatever variations that they have. I also like to show a video of the opponent's setter, but typically I only show that to the middles, perhaps in a small group. Sometimes the middles will get together and watch it and discuss it together. Depends on the situation. One thing that for some reason is absolutely vital to me is that whatever video that we have, the orientation, the perspective is consistent. So normally if I have a video of the spikers, then the spikers are on the other side of the net, and it's the same view that my block and defense will be watching that spiker. And the same with the servers. I want the servers to be on the other side of the net, serving towards me, so that the players also understand or they can have a sense of the way that the players serve and attack. In practicality, the setup for the video for the setters is really difficult to do from that perspective, because there are just too many bodies in the way to get a really close look at the setter, in which case I have the setter video on the near side, but only on the near side. The worst thing is if the players are in the meeting and they're constantly having to move their eyes and refocus on what they're looking at. The players are going to miss a lot of information in that back and forth all the time situation. And there we come to the end of our day's events. Here are some more of my coach development resources. If you want to check out webinars and also some practice plans that are there, you can go to At Home on the Court, which is markleverdew.com. On the front page there, it says educational resources. I think I might have changed that to development resources, but you'll be able to pick out straight away what it is. And here are some of the other ones that are already there. And I'm sure that you'll be able to find something of interest and of use to you in your coaching. And so with that, I bid you farewell for today. I hope that you enjoyed and got a lot out of this video. I hope to see you again soon, and I hope that you enjoy all of your interactions on markleverdew.com and At Home on the Court. Have a good one.